Everyone was laughing at the girl from the workshop, but her actions left them all shocked. The town of Fairview nestled quietly between rolling fields and dense forests, a place where change moved slowly and tradition held firm in the stubborn hearts of its residents. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where reputations were carved in stone by the time you were 10 years old and rarely shifted thereafter. In Fairview, paths were expected to be clear and predictable. School, a steady job, marriage, and children. Deviations from that course drew attention, and not the friendly kind. Emily Carter had lived all her 22 years in Fairview, mostly in the shadow of her late grandfather, Henry Carter, the town's most respected mechanic. His garage, once the beating heart of the town's small automotive community, had fallen into disuse after his death, but the memory of his skill lingered in the town's collective memory. Emily had spent countless afternoons in that dusty workshop, watching Henry coax life from battered engines and broken machines. She had learned the language of torque wrenches and carburetors, of pistons and spark plugs. With the same ease other children learned nursery rhymes. Yet despite her lineage, Emily's passion for mechanical work was not celebrated. It was tolerated at best, ridiculed at worst. Mechanics, in the minds of many in Fairview, were supposed to be men, weathered and burly, not slim-shouldered girls with calloused hands and bright, determined eyes. From the time she was old enough to lift a wrench, Emily had fought against the silent judgment that pressed down on her dreams. When news spread that Emily had enrolled in the Fairview Automotive Workshop, a prestigious course known for churning out the best mechanics in the region, reactions ranged from bemused disbelief to outright scorn. The workshop was a crucible of skill, a place where the best talents forged their future careers. It was dominated by men, many of whom had been working on cars longer than Emily had been alive. Her decision to enter their world was seen as both foolish and arrogant. On the morning of the first session, Emily stood before the workshop's broad weathered doors, a satchel of tools slung over her shoulder, her heart pounding fiercely. She wore sturdy jeans and a worn flannel shirt, her dark hair pulled back into a tight braid. As she stepped inside, the murmur of conversation ceased abruptly. 24 heads turned to regard her with varying degrees of amusement, disdain, and curiosity. At the far end of the workshop, a tall man with steel-gray hair and a commanding presence stepped forward. Mr. Bennett, the lead instructor, was a legend in Fairview, known for his unyielding standards and his uncanny ability to spot both talent and weakness at a glance. He surveyed Emily with cool detachment, giving no indication of approval or disapproval. His eyes were sharp, assessing, as if he were appraising a complicated piece of machinery. Without ceremony, he motioned for her to join the others. Emily moved to an empty workbench, acutely aware of the snickers and whispered comments that followed her. Tyler Jensen, a heavy-set man with a perpetual smirk, made no attempt to lower his voice when he muttered something about girls playing dress-up. Laughter rippled through the group, casual and cruel. Emily kept her eyes forward, her jaw set. She had expected this. She had braced for it. What mattered was not their opinions, but the work she would do. Her hands, skilled and steady, would speak louder than their mockery ever could. Mr. Bennett wasted no time. He outlined the workshop's expectations with brisk efficiency, punctuality, precision, discipline. There would be no second chances. Mistakes would be corrected with harsh lessons, not gentle encouragement. The highlight of the course, he explained, would be a competition. Each participant would build and modify an engine from scratch. The most efficient and innovative design would win a coveted apprenticeship at Holloway's Custom Motors, the premier automotive firm in the state. The announcement sent a ripple of excitement through the room. Emily felt a jolt of adrenaline, quickly tempered by the renewed looks of skepticism directed her way. It was clear that none of her peers considered her a threat. She was an anomaly, a curiosity, something to be humored until she inevitably failed. The rest of the day was a blur of activity. The participants were paired with their engines, hulking, grease-slicked blocks of potential. Emily approached her assigned station with reverence, her fingers itching to dive into the work. The smell of oil and steel filled her nostrils, comforting and invigorating. This was her element, her battlefield, As the others bantered and exchanged boasts about past projects and expected victories, Emily methodically unpacked her tools, laying them out with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. She checked the engine's condition, noting the worn gaskets, the slight pitting on the cylinder walls, the corrosion on the intake manifold. Problems to be solved, challenges to be conquered. By the time the first practical session began, the air was thick with competitiveness. Engines were stripped, cleaned, inspected. Wrenches clanked, grease flew, tempers flared. Emily worked in silence, her world narrowing to the intricate dance of metal and motion. It was during this flurry of activity that the inevitable happened. Reaching for a stubborn bolt on the underside of the engine, Emily's wrench slipped. A loud clang echoed through the workshop as the tool struck the concrete floor and skidded away. Conversations halted. Heads turned. A burst of laughter broke the silence, led by Tyler and quickly joined by others. Mr. Bennett, arms crossed over his chest, observed without comment. Emily retrieved the wrench with deliberate calm, refusing to let the redness flooding her cheeks show in her posture. She returned to her work, tightening the bolt with quiet determination. The laughter faded, but the sting remained, lingering like the acrid smell of burning oil. When the day finally ended, Emily packed her tools slowly, methodically. She ignored the pointed looks, the snide remarks. She had survived the first day, and survival was victory enough for now. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Emily stood for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air, grounding herself. The path ahead would be hard, harder than she had perhaps fully understood, but giving up was not an option. It never had been. She turned and walked away from the workshop, the weight of the day heavy on her shoulders, but her resolve unbroken. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new humiliations perhaps, but also new opportunities to prove herself. In Fairview, where dreams rarely stretched beyond the county lines, Emily Carter was preparing to defy every expectation, every whispered doubt, every dismissive laugh. And she was just getting started. Emily Carter walked into the workshop with a quiet hope tucked deep inside her heart. The heavy scent of motor oil and burnt rubber filled the air, a smell she had learned to love growing up in her grandfather's small garage. The other participants were already gathered around, mostly men in their 30s or 40s, each one appearing confident, tools slung casually over their shoulders or hands stuffed in grease-streaked pockets. They looked seasoned, like they belonged. Emily, on the other hand, felt like a trespasser in a world that had already decided she did not fit. Mr. Bennett, the workshop instructor, was a man with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He offered no special welcome, only a brief nod in Emily's direction, acknowledging her presence with the same indifference he showed the others. As he outlined the day's practical exercise, Emily fought to steady her breathing. The task was simple enough: dismantle a standard four-cylinder engine and reassemble it to working condition. It was basic, something she had done countless times at home, but the eyes of the room made her hands tremble slightly as she selected her tools. She moved carefully, methodically removing bolts and parts, placing them neatly on a clean cloth, but nerves got the better of her. As she reached to detach the intake manifold, her wrench slipped, and with a loud clatter a socket went flying across the room, hitting the concrete floor with a sharp, echoing sound. Laughter erupted instantly. It was not polite laughter, not a chuckle shared among peers, but full, hearty, mocking laughter that bounced off the garage walls. Emily froze, the wrench still in her hand, the flush creeping up her neck and staining her cheeks deep red. One of the participants, a burly man with a thick beard named Travis, muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe she should try a knitting workshop instead." More laughter followed. Emily glanced at Mr. Bennett, hoping for some intervention, but he only watched silently, arms crossed, his face unreadable. He neither defended her nor reprimanded the others. The message was clear. She would have to find her own way through this. Determined not to let the embarrassment paralyze her, Emily forced herself to focus. She retrieved the fallen socket, ignoring the continued snickers, and resumed her work. Her hands were steady now, moving with a precision born of stubborn pride. Still, every error she made, Every slight hesitation seemed to invite another round of ridicule. Whispers followed her movements like shadows. She could feel the weight of their judgment with every breath she took. As the day wore on, the practical exercise ended. Some engines roared back to life, albeit with hiccups and sputters, while others stubbornly refused to turn over. Emily's engine coughed a few times, but eventually hummed weakly, a small victory she clung to silently. When Mr. Bennet walked through the workshop, inspecting the results, he offered nods of approval or brief comments to the others. When he reached Emily's station, he paused longer than usual, his gaze sweeping over her work. He said nothing, only gave a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his head before moving on. The lack of encouragement stung more than any insult. Emily packed up her tools in silence, her heart heavy. The whispers had not stopped. She caught fragments of conversations, jokes at her expense, questions about why she was even allowed in the workshop. They did not see her passion. They saw only her mistakes. In their eyes, she was a curiosity, an outsider playing at a man's game. That night, as she lay in bed at the small motel she was staying in for the duration of the workshop, Emily stared at the ceiling, replaying every humiliating moment. Doubt crept in, insidious and persistent. She wondered if maybe they were right, if maybe she did not belong here. But then she remembered the afternoon spent in her grandfather's garage, his weathered hands guiding hers, teaching her not just the mechanics, but the heart behind every machine. She remembered the pride in his eyes when she rebuilt her first carburetor at 12 years old. She remembered how he had called her his little engineer, his voice filled with a conviction she desperately needed to borrow now. In the silence of the motel room, Emily made herself a promise. She would not let today define her. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to prove to herself, and maybe even to them, that she deserved her place in that workshop. She would not ask for their acceptance. She would earn their respect or walk away knowing she had given it everything she had. Outside, the night deepened, the sounds of the small town settling into a quiet hum. Inside Emily's heart, a small fire burned stubbornly against the cold. The laughter of the workshop still echoed in her mind, but it no longer had the power to paralyze her. It had become fuel, and Emily Carter, for all her shyness, had always known how to use fuel to create power. When morning came, she would be ready. The next morning arrived wrapped in a misty chill that clung stubbornly to the streets of the small town. Emily pulled on her worn jacket and made her way to the workshop with renewed determination. The sea, laughter, and the humiliation of the previous day still lingered in the back of her mind, but she had transformed them into something sharper, a blade she would forge into skill and resilience. The atmosphere in the workshop was different that morning. A palpable excitement buzzed through the air, subtle but noticeable, as if the group was anticipating something beyond the usual exercises and tasks. Mr. Bennet stood at the front of the room, his arms crossed over his chest, waiting for the participants to settle down. His silence commanded attention, and soon the idle chatter died away. Without preamble, Mr. Bennet spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the grease-streaked room. This year, he announced, we are bringing back an old tradition, a competition. You will each have the opportunity to design and build your own engine. The goal is simple. The most efficient, reliable build wins. A ripple of excitement coursed through the group. Some exchanged confident grins, others began murmuring about plans and strategies. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Mr. Bennet continued, his eyes scanning the crowd. The winner will receive not just a cash prize, but something far more valuable, a guaranteed apprenticeship at Holloway's Custom Motors. The name carried weight. Holloway's was legendary in the region, known for crafting some of the finest custom engines and restoring classic cars to museum quality. An apprenticeship there could launch a career beyond anything most of them had ever dreamed. For a moment, hope flared inside Emily, but it was quickly tempered by the memory of the laughter from the day before. Still, the challenge called to something deep within her, something that refused to be silenced by derision. If there was ever a way to prove herself, this was it. The rules are simple, Mr. Bennet said. You will work individually. No collaborations, no assistance. Each of you will receive a basic engine block. From there, you will modify, enhance, and refine as you see fit. You have 6 weeks. Final testing will be on efficiency, durability, and innovation." He paused, letting the gravity of the opportunity sink in. "Be warned, cutting corners will show. True craftsmanship is what we are looking for." The participants broke into animated discussions the moment Mr. Bennett finished speaking. Ideas were already being tossed around, alliances subtly proposed despite the prohibition on collaboration. Tyler, one of the loudest critics from the previous day, caught Emily's eye and smirked in open challenge. She returned his gaze without flinching, her resolve hardening. When the engine blocks were distributed, Emily approached hers with reverence. The block was a basic inline 4, sturdy but unremarkable. In the right hands, however, it could become something extraordinary. She ran her fingers over the cold metal, imagining the possibilities. Her mind raced through designs, modifications, theories she had studied late into countless nights. She would need to dig deep into everything she knew and innovate beyond the textbook solutions if she wanted to stand a chance. Over the following days, the workshop transformed into a battleground of creativity and skill. Sparks flew as grinders whined and welders flared. The smell of burnt metal and oil hung heavy. In the air, Emily worked quietly, methodically, while around her the other participants postured and boasted. They ignored her mostly, too caught up in their own projects to waste time with derision. It was almost a relief, the way she could slip into a kind of invisible rhythm, her hands and mind working in concert. Still, the pressure was immense. Emily knew she was not just competing against the others, she was battling the prejudices they carried against her, the doubts that lingered within herself. Every modification she made had to be perfect, every idea carefully tested and refined. There was no room for error, no margin for forgiveness. She studied old engineering manuals late into the night, cross-referencing them with modern innovations. She watched videos, read articles, and pored over diagrams until her eyes ached. Tyler and his friends often worked loudly, their jokes and taunts occasionally breaking through Emily's focus. She heard them making bets about who would crash and burn first. Her name was usually at the top of their lists, but she did not rise to their bait. She let them laugh, let them underestimate her, knowing that the only thing that would silence them was results. Mr. Bennett observed everything, rarely offering advice or correction. His watchful presence was a constant reminder that every move counted. Emily could feel his gaze linger on her at times, but she could not tell if it was with disapproval, curiosity, or something else entirely. He was a closed book, and Emily had learned quickly that expecting any kind of mentorship or fairness from him was futile. As the first week closed, fatigue began to gnaw at the edges of Emily's endurance. Her hands were perpetually stained with grease and calloused from hours of handling tools. Her back ached from leaning over engines, and her mind buzzed with equations and mechanical theories. But every time exhaustion whispered at her to slow down, she remembered what was at stake. One evening, long after most of the others had gone, home, Emily remained at her station, refining a new intake system she had designed. The quiet of the workshop was almost sacred at that hour, broken only by the soft clink of tools and the occasional rustle of paper as she consulted her notes. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not notice the shadow that detached itself from the darker corners of the garage. Tyler strolled over, hands shoved into his pockets, a lazy grin on his face. "Burning the midnight oil, Princess?" he drawled. His voice was thick with mockery. Emily did not look up, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "You know," he continued, leaning casually against the next workbench, "some of us are just born with the touch. Others, well, no amount of studying can fix certain problems." He laughed softly, a mean-spirited sound. Emily tightened the bolt she was working on with precise, measured force, then finally looked up. "You are right," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Talent helps, but hard work, resilience, and creativity, they go a lot further." Without waiting for his response, she turned back to her work, effectively dismissing him. For once, Tyler had no comeback. He watched her for a moment longer, something unreadable in his eyes. before pushing off the bench and sauntering away. Emily's hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline faded, but she pressed on. Every second counted, every improvement mattered. There was no room for fear or doubt anymore. The competition had begun in earnest, and Emily Carter was in it for the long haul. "I am ready whenever you are." The days bled into nights, and the EI line between them became increasingly blurred for Emily Carter. Her life was now consumed entirely by the workshop, the engine she was crafting, and the impossible standard she had set for herself. She worked until her vision blurred and her fingers grew numb, pushing her body and mind beyond anything she had endured before. Sleep became a luxury she could ill afford, reduced to fleeting naps stolen in the hours before dawn. Meals were rushed, often skipped altogether, replaced by lukewarm coffee and the occasional energy bar. Each morning she returned to the workshop, greeted by the familiar smells of oil and metal, the constant background noise of grinders, welders, and compressors. The other participants, energized by the competition, threw themselves into their work with an aggressive enthusiasm. Jokes and boasting filled the air, but Emily paid them no mind. She was an island of focus in a sea of chaos, her mind racing constantly with calculations and designs. Despite her growing exhaustion, Emily found a rhythm. She approached her project like a complex puzzle, breaking it down into manageable pieces. She reworked the combustion system, modifying the intake valves for better airflow. She redesigned the pistons to reduce friction and thermal loss. Every choice she made was deliberate, informed by hours of research and a deep intuition honed by years spent watching and learning from her grandfather. But the harder she worked, the more isolated she became. No one offered help, and she did not ask for it. Tyler and his clique occasionally hurled insults her way, but most of the time they ignored her, convinced she would crumble on her own. The workshop became a pressure cooker, every participant consumed by their own ambitions and fears. Paranoia set in. People guarded their workstations like fortresses, casting suspicious glances at anyone who wandered too close. The tension reached a breaking point during a mandatory progress test scheduled by Mr. Bennett. It was meant to be a midpoint evaluation, an opportunity to assess the engines under development and identify any major issues before the final competition. Each participant was required to demonstrate that their engine could start, idle, and maintain a basic load without catastrophic failure. The morning of the test, Emily awoke with a gnawing sense of dread. She had spent the entire previous night refining her timing belt adjustments, convinced she had ironed out the last of the issues. Her heart pounded as she wheeled her engine onto the test platform, aware of the smirks and whispers surrounding her. Tyler made a loud, theatrical show of covering his ears, prompting laughter from his friends. Mr. Bennett stood off to the side, clipboard in hand, his expression as impassive as ever. He called for silence, and one by one, the participants brought their engines to life. Some sputtered, others roared impressively. There were cheers and groans as engines succeeded or failed, but the mood was largely light, filled with the camaraderie of shared experience. Then it was Emily's turn. She connected the leads, double-checked her connections, and took a deep breath. As she turned the ignition switch, the engine coughed, struggled, and then, with a loud bang, backfired violently. The noise was deafening in the confined space. Smoke poured from the exhaust manifold, and the acrid stench of burning oil filled the air. Laughter erupted around her, harsher and more mocking than ever. Emily yanked the kill switch, her face burning with humiliation. Tyler's laughter was the loudest, cutting through the room like a blade. Even Mr. Bennett, for the first time, showed a flicker of visible emotion, a slight frown, perhaps disappointment or disapproval. "Looks like someone skipped the basics," Travis called out, slapping Tyler on the back. Emily forced herself to stay composed as she wheeled her smoking engine back to her station. Every step felt like an eternity, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing down on her. Her hands shook as she disconnected the battery, her mind racing through possible causes. She knew she had double-checked everything. Something was wrong, something deeper than just a careless mistake. That evening, after the others had left, Emily stayed behind to tear down her engine. She worked methodically, inspecting every gasket, every connection, every moving part. It was then that she found it, a small but crucial flaw in the fuel injection system, a component she had not touched, but that now showed signs of tampering. The gasket had been improperly seated, allowing air to leak into the combustion chamber. Whether it was an honest mistake or deliberate sabotage, she could not prove. All she knew was that she had not assembled it that way. Frustration and anger roiled inside her. But Emily forced herself to think clearly. She could not afford to be reckless, could not allow herself to be consumed by anger. Instead, she documented the issue meticulously, photographing the flaw and making notes. She would rebuild it better, stronger, more carefully than before. The next few days were among the hardest of her life. The public failure had shattered whatever fragile respect she might have been building. Whispers followed her everywhere, cruel and relentless. Yet Emily refused to quit. She ordered replacement parts using what little money she had left, sometimes waiting days for shipments to arrive. While others advanced their projects, she rebuilt hers from scratch, determined to eliminate every possible point of failure. Every bolt tightened, every weld completed, every part installed was an act of defiance against the laughter and the doubt. Emily was not working just to win anymore. She was working to reclaim her dignity, to prove to herself that she was not defined by one mistake, one moment of humiliation. She thought often of her grandfather during those long nights. She remembered his quiet confidence, the way he never rushed but always worked with a deliberate, steady hand. Smooth and smooth. "Is fast," he used to say. Emily repeated the mantra to herself as she worked, finding comfort in the familiar words. Slow is the workshop was not kind to those who stumbled, but Emily Carter had no intention of being left behind. She would rise, not because she was welcomed, but because she refused to be pushed out. As the competition moved toward its final phase, a storm was gathering, not outside but within the walls of the workshop, within the hearts of those who believed they had already seen all that Emily Carter had to offer. They were wrong. The mornings grew colder as autumn settled over the small town, the crisp air serving as a constant reminder that time was running out. Inside the workshop, the temperature never seemed to change. It remained a cocoon of heat, noise, and pressure, where the days blurred into nights, and the boundaries between ambition and desperation thinned to nothing. Emily worked without respite. Her hands, once steady and precise, now bore small nicks and bruises from hurried slips and late-night fatigue. Her mind, usually sharp and methodical, sometimes wandered, dragged down by the relentless demands she placed upon herself. Yet she forced herself forward, driven by something deeper than pride or ambition. She could not let them win. She could not let her own doubt consume her. Around her, the competition intensified. The other participants, emboldened by Emily's public failure, worked with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. They guarded their projects jealously, exchanging only curt nods and occasional suspicious glances. Tyler, in particular, seemed buoyed by Emily's setback, his taunts sharper, his laughter louder. He often passed her workbench with exaggerated care, as though the mere proximity to her might contaminate his own efforts. Despite the hostility, Emily noticed something peculiar in Mr. Bennett's behavior. While he remained outwardly detached, she caught him lingering near her station more often than was strictly necessary. His expression remained unreadable, but once or twice she thought she detected a glimmer of something almost like approval. She pushed the thought aside. She could not afford to depend on anyone's support, not even silently given. One evening, well past the hour when most of the others had gone home, Emily stayed behind to complete a delicate adjustment to her engine's new hybrid intake system. She was so absorbed that she did not hear the soft footsteps behind her until it was too late. A hand darted out quick and sure, reaching toward the fuel regulator she had carefully installed only hours before. Without thinking, Emily whirled around, catching the figure mid-action. The overhead lights illuminated a familiar face, Tyler. His hand froze, caught in the act, but he recovered almost instantly, pulling back and offering a slow, mocking smile. "Relax," he drawled, voice thick with false innocence, much to admire. "Just admiring your work." Not that there is Emily's heart pounded, but she refused to back down. She stepped between him and her engine, standing her ground. "Stay away. "From my station," she said, her voice low and steady. "Next time I will not just let you walk away." For a moment, the workshop was filled with nothing but the low hum of the overhead lights and the distant ticking of a cooling engine. Tyler held her gaze, something dangerous flickering in his eyes, before finally shrugging and turning away. "You are in way over your head, Princess," he said over his shoulder as he disappeared into the shadows. Emily's hand shook as she locked up her tools and double-checked every component of her engine. It was clear now. The sabotage during the progress test had not been an accident. Someone was actively trying to destroy her chances, and Tyler was the most obvious suspect. But without proof, confronting him would only make things worse. Mr. Bennett's rules were clear. Accusations without evidence would be treated as misconduct on the accuser's part. She needed to be smarter. She needed to protect her work and outthink those who wanted her to fail. From that night on, Emily implemented new precautions. She kept a meticulous log of her engine's configurations, photographing every change and locking her toolbox with a heavy-duty padlock. She installed a discreet motion sensor near her station, the kind meant for home security, bought with the last of her savings. It was a silent guardian, recording everything that happened in her absence. The days dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Emily's body protested with aches and exhaustion, but she ignored it. Her new design was beginning to take shape, a fusion of traditional mechanical principles and innovative modifications that she had painstakingly developed. It was not enough for her engine to function. It had to surpass expectations, to embody efficiency and resilience in a way none of the others could match. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of the other participants' projects. Some were impressive, boasting polished exteriors and aggressive designs. Others looked rushed, cobbled together by desperation. But none, Emily felt in her bones, carried the same careful, loving craftsmanship she had poured into hers. Every weld, every modification, spoke of nights spent wrestling with uncertainty and pushing through fear. Mr. Bennett announced that the final demonstration would take place in 1 week. The engines would be tested in front of a panel of experts from Holloway's Custom Motors and a few local dignitaries. The announcement sent a fresh wave of anxiety through the group. Arguments flared. Accusations of stolen ideas and sabotage were whispered in corners. Paranoia gnawed at the edges of every conversation. Emily remained silent through it all, her focus unshakable. She worked as if possessed, fine-tuning her engine until it purred like a living thing. She memorized every bolt, every curve, every nuance of its behavior. Her connection to it was almost visceral, an extension of her own will. But beneath the determination, a seed of doubt festered. What if it was not enough? What if, despite everything, they laughed again? What if Tyler or someone else found a way to undermine her before the final test? The thought kept her awake at night, staring at the cracked ceiling of her motel room, listening to the distant sounds of freight trains passing through the town. Still, every morning she rose, drove to the workshop, and faced the gauntlet. Every insult, every smirk, every obstacle became another layer of armor, another reason to keep fighting. One night, as she tightened the final bolts on a new exhaust system she had designed from salvaged parts, Emily caught a reflection in the window. Mr. Bennett, standing silently, watching her. For a moment, she thought he might say something, offer a word of advice or encouragement, but he only nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before turning away. It was not much, but it was enough. The week leading up to the final test became a crucible. Engines were tuned and retuned. Tempers flared. Friendships frayed under the strain. Everyone knew that winning meant more than just a prize. It meant validation, a shot at a future most of them could only dream about. For Emily, it meant redemption. As the final night before the demonstration arrived, she stood in the center of the empty workshop, surrounded by the quiet ghosts of her labor. Her engine gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a testament to every sacrifice, every insult endured, every hour of sleepless determination. Tomorrow, everything would be decided. The morning of the final presentation dawned heavy with tension. A low mist clung to the town, blurring the edges of buildings and casting the streets into an eerie silence. Emily Carter awoke before sunrise, her body stiff from another night of restless sleep. She moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, her mind already inside the workshop, already turning wrenches and fine-tuning adjustments in her imagination. The engine she had built was ready. She had triple-checked every component, tested every connection, and documented every change. It was not a machine anymore. It was an extension of her will, forged through suffering and perseverance. As she pulled into the workshop parking lot, she noticed the others arriving too, their faces drawn tight with nerves. Even Tyler, usually so full of swagger, wore a grim expression. Inside, the workshop had been transformed. Rows of chairs were set up facing the presentation area. Polished workstations gleamed under bright lights. A group of judges wearing serious expressions and crisp clothing clustered near the front, consulting clipboards and murmuring quietly among themselves. Representatives from Holloway's Custom Motors were easy to spot, their jackets embroidered with the company's logo, their stances radiating authority. Mr. Bennett stood near the EU main entrance, overseeing everything with his usual reserved demeanor. His sharp eyes missed nothing, scanning participants and guests alike. When he saw Emily, he gave her a small nod, just as he had on the night before. She drew strength from it, the silent acknowledgement meaning more than any spoken word could have. Participants were assigned numbers at random, determining the order in which they would present. Emily was drawn near the end, which meant she would have to sit through hours of demonstrations before her own chance arrived. The wait was agonizing, each passing minute another twist of the screw tightening inside her chest. One by one, others wheeled their engines onto the presentation stand. Some roared to life impressively, others stumbled, a few even failed to start at all. Each success and failure brought waves of muttered conversation among the spectators and judges. Emily took it all in silently, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her mind replaying every step of her own build, every contingency plan. Tyler presented just before her. His engine looked impressive, all chrome and precision welding. He grinned confidently as he fired it up, the machine responding with a deep, throaty growl. The judges nodded approvingly as Tyler explained his modifications, detailing his approach to improving fuel efficiency and torque. When his time ended, he left the stand with a smug glance in Emily's direction, as if daring her to top it. Finally, Mr. Bennett called her number. Emily stood, her legs stiff but steady, and rolled her engine onto the stand. The room fell into a hushed anticipation. Whispers swirled through the air, not all of them kind. She could feel their skepticism like a physical weight pressing against her. Taking a steadying breath, she connected the ignition leads, checked the fuel flow one last time, and turned the key. Her engine roared to life instantly, the sound sharp and clean, unlike anything the room had heard all morning. The vibration through the concrete floor was different, smoother, more controlled. The judges leaned forward almost immediately, their pens pausing above their clipboards. Emily moved into her explanation, her voice clear and strong despite the thundering of her heart. She detailed her custom intake system, her friction-reducing piston modifications, and her innovative exhaust recirculation design that dramatically reduced emissions and increased fuel economy. She presented data, charts, and test results, all meticulously prepared. By the time she finished, the room was silent, not hostile, but stunned. Even Tyler looked rattled, his earlier confidence draining away under the weight of her flawless presentation and the undeniable performance of her machine. The judges conferred briefly, then one of the representatives from Holloway's stepped forward to ask a few technical questions. Emily answered each one with precision and composure, drawing from the deep well of knowledge she had built over countless sleepless nights. When she finally stepped down from the platform, her knees nearly buckled with the release of tension. Applause broke out, not raucous or overwhelming, but genuine, grudging from some, enthusiastic from others. For the first time since she had walked into that workshop, Emily Carter was not an outsider. She was a contender. The presentations concluded, and the judges retreated to deliberate. The participants milled about, tension crackling through the air like static electricity. Tyler hovered nearby, his expression dark and unreadable. Emily kept her distance, unwilling to risk any confrontation until the results were announced. But fate had other plans. She was gathering her tools, preparing to secure her engine for transport, when she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found herself face to face with Tyler. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a thin, bitter smile. "You think you have won," he said, voice low enough that no one else could hear. "Cheated. No way you built that thing by yourself." "But you," Emily stared at him, disbelief and anger flaring to life inside her. "My work," she said quietly. "Every bolt, every weld. Everything on that engine is—" Tyler shook his head slowly, almost pityingly. "Does not matter. People like you. You get a handout or a sympathy vote. You will never really belong here." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Sabotage me. You failed. Get used to it. I earned everything today. You tried to—" For a moment, Emily thought Tyler might lash out. His fists clenched at his sides, his face twisted with frustration. But then Mr. Bennett's voice cut through the tension, calling everyone to attention for the announcement of the results. Tyler glared at her one last time before stalking away. Emily took her place among the participants, her heart hammering against her ribs. No matter what happened now, she had fought her battle. She had stood her ground. Mr. Bennett stepped forward, a sealed envelope in his hand. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as he opened it and read the results. "In third place," he announced, "is Travis Mendez." Polite applause. "In second place, Tyler Jensen." Tyler's face twisted, the polite smile he managed to force out looking more like a grimace. "And in first place," Mr. Bennett said, pausing for effect, "Emily Carter." For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then the room erupted into applause, louder and more sustained than before. Emily stood frozen, the words barely sinking in. It was not a dream. It was real. She had won. She had truly, undeniably won. Understood perfectly. The applause washed over Emily like a distant tide, surreal and muted against the roaring in her ears. She stood rooted in place, heart hammering violently inside her chest, every nerve in her body alight with disbelief and fragile, dawning triumph. Mr. Bennett's voice calling her name had not been an illusion. She had heard it clearly. She had beaten them all. Slowly, almost mechanically, Emily stepped forward to accept her certificate and handshake from Mr. Bennett. His grip was firm, and for the first time, there was a faint curve to his mouth, almost, but not quite a smile. Their eyes met briefly, and in that fleeting second, Emily felt a silent message pass between them. Respect, recognition, and something harder earned than mere approval, acknowledgement of her right to stand among them. Photographs were taken, and the representatives from Holloway's Custom Motors approached her, offering congratulations and outlining the next steps for her apprenticeship. Their words were polite, professional, but Emily could see something, more in their eyes, genuine interest, a curiosity about the young woman who had defied expectations and rewritten the rules of their world. She answered their questions with quiet confidence, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions surging within her. Around her, the other participants gathered their things, some throwing glances in her direction, some grudging, some admiring, a few openly hostile. Tyler lingered near the exit, watching her with a mixture of anger and something closer to fear. He had been so certain of his superiority, so convinced that he could mock and sabotage her into submission. Now he stood on the sidelines, watching her claim the prize he had thought was his by right. Emily did not seek him out. She did not need to. Her victory was complete, not in crushing him underfoot, but in proving to herself and to everyone else that she could stand on her own. Later that evening, after the crowd had dispersed and the workshop had emptied out, Emily remained behind, her certificate clutched tightly in her hands. She walked the familiar rows of workbenches and tool racks, each one a silent witness to the battles she had fought. She paused by her engine, running her fingers lightly over the cool metal. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights, every curve and bolt a testament to her perseverance. The realization struck her with sudden clarity. This was not the end. Winning. The competition was not the culmination of her journey. It was only the beginning. There would be new challenges ahead, new prejudices to overcome, new mistakes to make, and lessons to learn. But for the first time in her life, Emily felt ready. Mr. Bennet approached her as she packed up her tools. He stood silently for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "You earned it," he said finally. His voice was rough, but there was no mistaking the sincerity behind it. Every part of it. Emily met his gaze and nodded. There was nothing more to say. Driving back to her motel that night, the town unfolded around her, its familiar streets and worn storefronts softened by the golden glow of streetlights. She thought of her grandfather, of the lessons he had imparted with grease-stained hands and infinite patience. She thought of the afternoons spent learning not just the mechanics of machines, but the mechanics of persistence, the stubborn art of refusing to give up even when every voice told her she should. The next morning, Emily visited her grandfather's old garage, a crumbling structure on the edge of town. Its windows boarded up, its sign faded and barely legible. She had not been there in years. The place looked smaller than she remembered, worn and tired. But in its bones, she could still feel the echoes of the dreams they had shared. She stood there for a long time, the cool morning wind tugging at her jacket, thinking about the future. The apprenticeship at Holloway's would be a golden opportunity, a chance to hone her skills under some of the finest craftsmen in the country. But as she stared at the sagging roof and the cracked pavement, a different dream began to stir in her heart, one that had been planted long ago and buried under years of self-doubt. She could rebuild it, the garage, the legacy. It would not be easy. It would take time, money, and more grit than she had ever needed before. But the thought of breathing new life into this place, of creating a space where young people like her could learn and grow without fear of mockery or exclusion, filled her with a fierce, soaring hope. The decision settled over her like a mantle. She would accept the apprenticeship at Holloway's, learn everything she could, and then she would come back. She would buy the old garage, restore it, and build something lasting, something that would outlive the petty judgments and small-minded cruelty she had endured. She would build a place of learning, of craftsmanship, of second chances. Standing there, Emily could almost see it. The gleaming workbenches, the hum of engines, the bright laughter of students who knew they belonged. She could almost hear her grandfather's voice, low and proud, calling her his little engineer. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her back to the present. It was a message from one of the Holloway's representatives confirming the start date for her apprenticeship and expressing excitement at the prospect of working with her. Emily smiled, a real unguarded smile that felt like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. She walked back to her car with a new spring in her step, the old garage receding into the distance, but not from her heart. The road ahead would not be easy, but Emily Carter had never been afraid of hard work. She had faced ridicule, sabotage, and failure, and she had emerged stronger for it. She would face whatever came next with the same unyielding spirit that had carried her through the darkest nights. And somewhere down that long, winding road, she would build a legacy not just for herself, but for everyone who dared to dream beyond the laughter of small minds. Perfectly acknowledged. The first few weeks at Holloway's Custom Motors were a revelation for Emily Carter. Each day unfolded like a living textbook, packed with rare engines, master techniques, and insights shared by seasoned experts who lived and breathed automotive craftsmanship. Emily absorbed everything, working tirelessly and refusing to squander the opportunity she had fought so hard to earn. But not everyone welcomed her presence with open arms. Some of the older apprentices treated her with the same thinly veiled disdain she had encountered back at the workshop. Whispers followed her through the gleaming hallways and echoing bays. Some insisted she had only been chosen as a publicity stunt, a token nod to diversity. Emily ignored them. She had not come to Holloway's to make friends or to be coddled. She had come to master her craft. Every morning she arrived before the others and stayed long after the sun dipped below the horizon. She volunteered for the most tedious tasks, the grimiest jobs, the repairs others considered beneath them. She studied blueprints late into the night, memorized engine schematics until the lines danced in front of her eyes, and asked questions, carefully, strategically, choosing her mentors among those who valued skill over reputation. It was during one of those long evenings, working alone in the fabrication bay, that disaster struck. She had been developing a prototype for a modified high-efficiency carburetor based on some of the innovations she had designed during the competition. It was a delicate, ambitious project, one that could significantly reduce emissions and increase performance in older engine models. Emily had poured weeks of work into it, sketching designs, crafting components by hand, and testing them meticulously. Then one night, after a particularly grueling day, she returned to her locked workstation to find it ransacked. Her prototype was gone. Not just the carburetor itself, but her notes, her blueprints, every piece of documentation. The drawers were pulled out, tools scattered across the floor, and a mocking message scrawled in grease on her workbench. "Stay in your lane." Emily stood in the middle of the chaos, her mind numb. For a few minutes she could not move. She could barely breathe. All her work stolen, all her hours erased with a few vicious, cowardly strokes. The supervisors launched an investigation, but Holloway's was a large operation, and security cameras in that particular bay had been under maintenance. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, no trail. Whoever had done it had covered their tracks well. Officially, nothing could be proven. Unofficially, Emily knew exactly what had happened. Some of her fellow apprentices, threatened by her talent and determination, had decided to break her the only way they knew how, by erasing her work and eroding her spirit. But they had miscalculated. After the initial shock wore off, anger surged. Through Emily, cold, focused, and utterly unyielding. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She would rebuild, from memory, from grit, from sheer refusal to quit. That night she sat in her tiny apartment, a battered notebook, in her lap, sketching designs by the dim light of a single desk lamp. Her mind raced, not with panic but with determination. She would not try to recreate her stolen work exactly. She would improve it, make it better, faster, leaner. She had internalized every design choice, every calculation. They could steal her papers, but they could not steal what she had built inside herself. With no money left to buy new materials, Emily turned to improvisation. She scavenged scraps from the refuse piles at Holloway's, pulling discarded parts from broken machines, salvaging metals others deemed useless. She worked with what she had, transforming junk into precision components, with the careful artistry of a sculptor reclaiming shattered marble. The process was agonizingly slow. Every bolt, every gasket, every curve had to be meticulously fabricated by hand. Without formal schematics, every piece had to fit perfectly by intuition and feel. Emily's hands blistered and bled, but she pressed on, driven by a fire that burned hotter with every stolen hour. Word spread quietly through the workshop. Whispers of what had happened and of what Emily was doing to fight back began to circulate among the apprentices and senior craftsmen alike. Some watched with curiosity. A few who had once doubted her now regarded her with a wary respect. Among them was Marcus Lee, one of Holloway's senior engineers, a grizzled veteran whose reputation for innovation was matched only by his gruff demeanor. He began stopping by Emily's bay, offering cryptic comments and the occasional rough suggestion. At first, Emily was wary, but it soon became clear that Marcus was not there to patronize her. He respected talent, and what he saw in Emily's relentless, meticulous work earned his approval. "You are stubborn as hell," Marcus said one evening, watching her align a hand-filed gasket with surgeon-like precision. "Good. The best ones always are." With Marcus's reluctant mentorship, Emily's project accelerated. She refined her designs, tested new materials, and introduced improvements that made her original prototype seem almost crude by comparison. The final product, a gleaming, compact carburetor that fit neatly into her palm, was a triumph of ingenuity born from adversity. When she finally presented it to the lead engineers for review, the room fell silent. They tested it, they dissected it, they ran simulations and real-world performance trials, and it surpassed every expectation. Efficiency gains of 20% over existing models, emission reductions that exceeded federal standards by a wide margin. a price point that made it viable for mass production without expensive retooling. Offers began pouring in almost immediately: partnership proposals, licensing opportunities, invitations to join prestigious design teams. Holloway's itself offered her a lead position on a new innovation project, a meteoric rise almost unheard of for someone so new to the company. Emily accepted none of them right away. She remembered the garage. She remembered the dream. She was not building for prestige. She was building a future, one salvaged from the wreckage others had tried to leave her in. They had underestimated Emily Carter once. They would not do so again. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, tests, and negotiations. Emily Carter's prototype had exploded into the consciousness of the automotive engineering world, far faster than she had expected. Magazines requested interviews. Trade journals ran headlines speculating about the young woman who had seemingly appeared from nowhere, with an invention poised to disrupt established markets. Yet Emily remained focused, grounded by a promise she had made to herself long before. The world had learned her name. Success meant nothing if she forgot why she had started. Inside Holloway's, the atmosphere shifted. Where once there had been whispers of mockery, now there was a wary respect. Apprentices who had once smirked behind her back now nodded cautiously when she passed. The older engineers, men and women, who had built their careers in the forge of harsh realities, treated her with a blunt professionalism that was almost a form of acceptance. Emily took neither their newfound respect nor their skepticism personally. She knew better than anyone that reputations could change as quickly as the wind. Her official presentation of the prototype to the broader industry was scheduled for the first Friday of the following month during the annual Regional Innovation Expo, a prestigious event that brought together manufacturers, investors, and innovators from across the state. Emily's time slot was reserved for late in the afternoon, a prime position that suggested Holloway's leadership had faith she would deliver something extraordinary. The day arrived cloaked in heavy grey clouds that threatened rain, but never quite delivered. Emily awoke early, her mind calm in a way that surprised her. She dressed with care in practical but professional clothes, her hair tied back in a neat braid. As she drove to the convention center, she rehearsed her presentation silently. Every word, every step of the demonstration etched into her mind. The expo was a sensory assault of noise, color, and movement. Booths lined the cavernous space, each one clamoring for attention with flashing lights, spinning displays, and eager representatives thrusting brochures into the hands of passing attendees. Emily navigated through the chaos, making her way to the reserved section where Holloway's had set up a large professional exhibit featuring their latest projects. Her prototype sat under a clear protective case, surrounded by posters detailing its specifications and potential applications. As the hour of her presentation approached, a small crowd gathered. Industry professionals, reporters, rival companies' scouts, and curious onlookers all pressed forward, drawn by the buzz that had been steadily building since Emily's arrival at Holloway's. She stood behind the podium, her hands resting lightly on the edges, waiting for the moderator to finish his introduction. At last, it was time. Emily stepped forward, her voice strong and steady as she began to speak. She outlined the problems facing older engine models, the environmental challenges, the market demand for affordable retrofitting solutions. She explained her design process, the materials chosen, the engineering hurdles overcome. Every word was deliberate, every explanation clear and precise without ever sounding rehearsed. When she unveiled the prototype itself, a ripple of impressed murmurs ran through the audience. The demonstration went flawlessly. The carburetor adapted to the test engine on display without hesitation, improving fuel efficiency by measurable margins and reducing emissions visibly through the sensors attached to the exhaust. When she finished, the applause was immediate and sustained, genuine appreciation from an audience that understood exactly how difficult her achievement was. As she stepped down from the podium, representatives from major manufacturing firms approached her almost at once, eager to discuss licensing agreements, partnerships, and production deals. Emily handled the conversations with a polite firmness, making it clear that any negotiations would happen later, on her terms, and only with her legal counsel present. Among the crowd, she spotted familiar faces, Marcus Lee giving her a rare, approving nod, Mr. Bennett watching with his usual inscrutable expression, and to her surprise, even some of her former workshop rivals who had traveled to see the expo. Their expressions ranged from open admiration to sullen acceptance. Emily greeted them with quiet civility, offering no gloating or bitterness. She had nothing to prove to them anymore. The day wore on, a relentless procession of meetings and introductions. By the time the sun set, Emily was exhausted but exhilarated. She had not just survived the day, she had conquered it. Late that evening, back at her apartment, she sat alone on the small balcony, sipping tea and letting the events of the day settle around her like falling leaves. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to reflect not just on the battles fought, but on the battles still to come. The success of her prototype was a milestone, not a destination. She had secured financial backing, industry credibility, and a network of contacts that would be invaluable when the time came to resurrect her grandfather's garage. But Emily understood that real success would not be measured by awards or contracts. It would be measured by the work she continued to do, by the opportunities she created for others like herself. Outsiders, dreamers, fighters. Her mind drifted. To the old garage again, to the cracked concrete and sagging roof, the scent of motor oil and sawdust lingering in her memories. She imagined it filled with life once more. Young apprentices learning not just the mechanics of machines, but the mechanics of perseverance. A place where mistakes were seen as steps toward mastery rather than evidence of inadequacy. A place where no one would laugh simply because someone dared to try. The path ahead was still long and uncertain. There would be new obstacles, new moments of doubt and frustration. But tonight, as the city lights blinked in the distance and the cool, night air brushed against her skin, Emily Carter allowed herself a rare luxury pride. Not in the applause or the accolades, but in the simple, stubborn fact that she had endured. Not just engines, not just innovations, but hope, possibility, a future forged not from privilege, but from resilience. Tomorrow would be another day, another challenge, and Emily Carter would be ready. The week following the expo was filled with a kind of dizzying chaos that Emily Carter had never experienced before. She was no longer just another apprentice tucked away in the corners of Holloway's vast facilities. She had become a name that circulated in conversations held in boardrooms and technical meetings, mentioned alongside established innovators and industry veterans. Articles about her design flooded online forums and automotive magazines, each one painting her as a symbol of perseverance and ingenuity. Yet Emily remained wary of the attention. She had seen enough to understand that fame, especially sudden fame, could be as much a burden as a blessing. Invitations to speak at universities arrived in her inbox, along with offers from companies wanting her endorsement, her ideas, or simply the association with her name. For every genuine opportunity, there seemed to be twice as many empty flattery and thinly veiled attempts at exploitation. She kept her head down, returning to work as if nothing had changed, focusing on the projects she had committed to before the expo. Holloway's leadership offered her a private office and a personal assistant, but she declined both, choosing instead to remain on the workshop floor where the real work happened. She wanted grease under her fingernails, the hum of engines in her ears, the smell of fresh metal and machine oil grounding her to what mattered. Despite her efforts to maintain normalcy, changes rippled through her environment. Her colleagues approached her with a different energy now. Where there had once been mockery or indifference, now there was careful respect. Even Tyler, who had once been the loudest voice against her, kept his distance, offering nothing but brief nods when their paths crossed. Emily neither sought reconciliation nor harbored resentment. She understood that her true victory lay not in humiliating those who had doubted her, but in succeeding despite them. As the months passed, her projects expanded. Holloway's trusted her with more complex assignments, integrating her innovative designs into broader systems. Emily also began working closely with Marcus Lee on a special initiative aimed at modernizing vintage vehicles with environmentally friendly technology, a project that aligned perfectly with her vision for the future. Still, her thoughts often wandered back to her true dream, restoring her grandfather's garage into a working hub for young mechanics and engineers. She set aside every extra penny she earned, funneling her bonuses and awards into a private fund earmarked for that purpose. She even began scouting properties, speaking quietly with real estate agents and contractors, laying the groundwork for the day she would make the dream a reality. It was during one of these scouting trips, in the dying light of a Sunday evening, that she found it. Tucked away on a quiet street near the edge of town, a crumbling two-story building stood forgotten. The windows were boarded up, the lot overgrown with weeds, but beneath the neglect, Emily could see the bones of what it once had been and what it could become again. The brickwork was solid, the foundation strong. It would take hard work and a significant investment, but the space had the soul she had been searching for. Without hesitation, she began the process of purchase, negotiating fiercely to secure the property at a price she could manage. By the time winter rolled in, covering the town in a blanket of snow, the building was hers. Owning it felt different from winning awards or gaining recognition. It felt real in a way that applause and accolades never could. It was a tangible piece of her history, a foundation on which to build her future. Emily wasted no time. She drew up renovation plans, focusing first on restoring the structural integrity of the building. Roof repairs, electrical rewiring, plumbing overhauls, each step brought her closer to her vision. She enlisted the help of a few trusted colleagues from Holloway's, people she knew valued craftsmanship and shared her passion for learning. Work was grueling and progress was slow. There were days when the setbacks felt insurmountable, unexpected. Expenses, bureaucratic red tape, materials arriving late or damaged. But Emily refused to give up. Every obstacle was just another challenge to be overcome, another test of the determination that had carried her this far. Word of the project spread through the town. Curious residents stopped by to watch the slow transformation. Some remembered the garage from decades past when her grandfather had run it with pride. They shared stories, photographs, and sometimes hands willing to help paint or clear debris. What began as a solitary endeavor gradually grew into a community effort. By spring, the garage's new sign was hung. Carter's Workshop, Esther 1963, Reborn 2025. The opening day celebration was modest but heartfelt. Friends, neighbors, former skeptics, and even a few local officials gathered to see what Emily had built. The inside of the garage gleamed with fresh paint, new equipment, and workstations designed not just for efficiency, but for learning. One corner was dedicated to a small library of technical manuals and engineering textbooks. Another housed a lounge area where apprentices could gather, exchange ideas, and find encouragement. Emily stood in front of the assembled crowd, feeling a surge of emotion that no trophy or award could ever match. She spoke briefly, thanking those who had supported her journey and inviting young mechanics and engineers to find a home in Carter's Workshop. She spoke of her grandfather, of the dreams that had started in a tiny garage, and of the belief that no one should ever be laughed at simply for daring to dream. The workshop opened its doors to its first students within the month. Some were teenagers from local schools, others young adults seeking to learn a trade or start anew after difficult chapters in their lives. Emily taught them all with patience and rigor, insisting on the same standards she had always demanded of herself. She taught them that failure was a step toward mastery, that resilience mattered more than perfection, and that respect had to be earned through action, not demanded through entitlement. There were setbacks, of course. Machines broke, students grew frustrated, funding was tight, but the dream held firm, growing stronger with each passing season. As summer settled over the town, Emily often found herself lingering after classes ended, working late into the night on her own projects. The old garage, once filled with ghosts of doubt and failure, now pulsed with life, laughter, and the steady hum of engines coming back to life under capable, determined hands. And sometimes, when the night was quiet and the stars hung low over the horizon, Emily Carter would step outside, wiping her hands on a rag, and look up at the sky. She had built something enduring. She had forged triumph from ashes, and she was just getting started. Months passed, and Carter's Workshop grew into more than Emily had ever dared to imagine. It became a magnet for young talent, a haven for those who sought a place to learn without the weight of prejudice hanging over them. Emily refused to let the workshop become just another business chasing profit. She structured it as a non-profit organization, channeling any surplus funds back into scholarships, tools, and programs that expanded opportunities for her students. Local newspapers wrote feature articles about the revitalization of the once-forgotten building. Word traveled quickly, and soon Carter's workshop was hosting visitors from neighboring towns, engineers and mechanics who came to offer guest lectures, demonstrations, and mentorship sessions. Each visitor added something new to the growing culture of excellence and inclusion that Emily so carefully nurtured. It was not long before regional universities took notice. A partnership formed with the state's largest technical college, allowing Carter's workshop to offer certified apprenticeship programs. This partnership brought a fresh wave of students eager to prove themselves, many of whom had faced rejection elsewhere because they did not fit the mold of the traditional engineering world. In Carter's workshop, there was no mold to fit into. There was only the work, the beautiful, demanding, stubborn work of learning and building. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves danced along the sidewalks, Emily received a letter that would once have seemed unthinkable. It came on heavy, cream-colored paper, embossed with the seal of the National Engineering Association. She had been nominated for the association's Rising Innovator Award, a national honor given annually to one individual whose work significantly advanced the fields of engineering and technical education. The nomination alone felt surreal. Winning seemed even more impossible. Emily tucked the letter into a drawer and told almost no one about it. She continued her work as if nothing had changed, refusing to let herself be distracted by what felt like an impossible dream. Recognition was not why she had built the workshop. Changing lives was. However, others were less restrained. Marcus Lee, now one of her most trusted advisors and friends, found out through industry contacts and made sure that everyone associated with the workshop knew. The students were thrilled. They threw themselves into their projects with renewed energy, eager to honor the woman who had believed in them when no one else would. As winter approached, the workshop prepared for its first ever open house, an event where students would showcase their projects to the community. Emily worked side by side with them, helping them fine-tune their presentations, repair last-minute issues, and polish their speaking skills. The night of the open house, Carter's workshop overflowed with guests, parents, teachers, local business owners, and curious residents. Tables lined the walls, each one featuring an engine rebuild, a custom vehicle modification, or an innovative mechanical design. The pride in the students' eyes as they explained their work was worth more to Emily than any award. She moved through the crowd, answering questions, shaking hands, offering encouragement. She caught glimpses of herself in their excitement, the same wide-eyed determination, the same hunger to prove themselves, the same refusal to accept defeat. The night ended with laughter and applause, a cake hastily decorated with "Congratulations, Miss Carter," in uneven frosting letters, and a spontaneous speech by one of her youngest students, a 17-year-old girl named Sophia, who declared with shining eyes that she wanted to be just like Emily when she grew up. Emily barely slept that night, overwhelmed by gratitude and a fierce, almost painful sense of purpose. She knew now, beyond any doubt, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 2 weeks later, she received another letter, this one announcing that she had won the Rising Innovator Award. The ceremony would be held in Washington, D.C., and her presence was requested to accept the honor in person. She hesitated only a moment before agreeing. Not because she craved the spotlight, but because she knew that her students needed to see that hard work and integrity could be recognized, that success built on resilience and honesty was possible even in a world that often seemed to reward the opposite. The trip to Washington was a whirlwind. She traveled by train, preferring the steady, rhythmic progress of the rails over the jarring dislocation of air travel. She spent the journey reviewing her brief acceptance speech, determined to use the platform not for self-congratulation, but to advocate for greater inclusion and opportunity in technical education. The ceremony was held in a grand hall, filled with towering columns and sparkling chandeliers. Industry leaders, educators, and innovators filled the room. When Emily's name was called, she walked to the stage with calm, deliberate steps. She wore a simple, well-tailored suit and the necklace her grandfather had given her when she was a child, a tiny silver wrench that had become her personal talisman. Her speech was short but powerful. She spoke of the need to break down barriers, to create spaces where talent could flourish, regardless of background, gender, or privilege. She spoke of Carter's workshop, of the students who had taught her as much as she had taught them. She ended by reminding the audience that innovation was not just about machines, it was about people, about unlocking the potential that existed in places others often overlooked. The applause that followed was not thunderous, but it was sincere. As she stepped down from the stage, many in the audience stood, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect. That night, alone in her hotel room, Emily set the award on the bedside table and looked at it for a long time. It was beautiful, gleaming under the soft light, but it was not a symbol of her victory. It was a symbol of all the battles fought, of all the laughter endured, of all the nights spent doubting and fighting and refusing to give up. She sent a quick message to Marcus and the students, telling them that the award belonged to all of them. She knew that when she returned, it would sit not in her apartment, but on a shelf in Carter's workshop, where every student who walked through the door could see it and know that greatness was within their reach. Emily Carter had not set out to be a symbol or a pioneer. She had simply refused to stop building, and because of that, she had helped build a future bigger than any. She had dared to dream. Returning home from Washington, D.C., Emily Carter felt a profound shift within herself. She had stood among giants and had not felt small. She had delivered her message to a room full of power and influence and had been heard. Yet when the train pulled into her small hometown station and the familiar outline of the town came into view, she felt a deeper satisfaction than any applause could ever provide. This town, these streets, and that battered garage-turned-sanctuary were her true rewards. The next morning, as she walked through the doors of Carter's workshop, she was met with a roar of cheers. Her students had decorated the space with banners and hand-drawn posters, each one celebrating her victory in their own heartfelt way. They had even recreated a model of her award out of spare metal parts, welding together a rough but charming replica that sat proudly on a table by the entrance. Emily hugged them all, thanking each one personally, and promised them that the real work was only just beginning. She returned to her daily routine without hesitation, leading classes, supervising projects, and working late into the night on new programs she hoped to implement. She had not started Carter's workshop to chase accolades. She had built it to change lives, and she intended to honor that purpose with every hour of her labor. News of her award traveled fast. Requests for interviews poured in, and although she declined most of them, she agreed to a few carefully chosen conversations where she could focus on promoting technical education and community empowerment. The workshop's enrollment doubled. Over the next few months, and with it, the weight of responsibility on her shoulders grew. Emily embraced it without complaint. Every new student was a life she might help shape, a mind she might help ignite. It was during one of these busy afternoons, as she guided a group of students through a particularly challenging engine rebuild, that a visitor arrived. Marcus Lee met her near the tool racks with a strange expression on his face, half amusement, half cautious respect. He told her there was someone she needed to meet, someone waiting in the small front office. Wiping her hands on a rag, Emily made her way there, expecting perhaps another local journalist or a prospective student. Instead, she found a woman in a sharply tailored suit, carrying a slim briefcase and an air of quiet authority. She introduced herself as Helen Draper, the regional director for Orion Engineering Solutions, one of the largest and most respected engineering firms in the country. Helen wasted no time with small talk. She laid out her purpose with professional clarity. Orion was impressed by Emily's work, not just her inventions, but her leadership, her educational model, and her ability to inspire innovation in others. They wanted her to join them, not just as an engineer, but as the head of a new division focused on educational outreach and technological development for underserved communities. The offer was staggering. A salary that dwarfed anything she had ever earned, a generous relocation package, full creative control over her division, and access to resources beyond her wildest dreams. It was an opportunity to influence the industry at a national level, to scale her vision far beyond the borders of her small town. Helen gave her a week to consider it. That evening, Emily sat alone in her office long after the students had gone home. The moonlight slanted through the windows, casting silver shadows across the workshop floor. She turned the offer over and over in her mind, weighing its possibilities against her current reality. On paper, it was a dream, but dreams, she knew, were complicated things. Accepting the position would mean leaving Carter's workshop behind, at least in a day-to-day capacity. It would mean trusting others to carry forward what she had built with her own hands. It would mean stepping onto a much larger stage, one where the battles would be fiercer and the stakes even higher. Yet it would also mean reaching students she would otherwise never meet, bringing opportunities to places she could not physically reach from her small corner of the world. It would mean honoring the spirit of Carter's workshop by expanding its mission across a national landscape. Still, doubt gnawed at her. Could she trust anyone else to love this place the way she did? Could she be sure that the heart of her dream would survive her absence? The next morning, she gathered her students and staff and told them about the offer. She explained it honestly, without embellishment or apology. Then she did something she had never done before. She asked for their advice. The response was overwhelming and immediate. They urged her to go. Not because they wanted her gone, but because they believed in her, believed that she could do even more good if she accepted. They promised her that Carter's workshop would stand strong, that the foundation she had laid was solid enough to weather her departure. They would carry on her legacy with pride, and they would always welcome her home. It was not an easy decision, but by the end of the week, it was made. Emily Carter accepted the offer from Orion Engineering Solutions. She arranged for Marcus Lee to take over as director of Carter's workshop, trusting him to protect and nurture the culture they had built together. She created a board of advisors from among her senior students and local supporters to guide the workshop's growth and ensure its mission stayed true. Her final day at Carter's workshop was bittersweet. There was no grand farewell, no elaborate ceremony, just a simple gathering of students and friends standing among the tools and machines that had witnessed their shared journey. Emily spoke, briefly, thanking them for their trust, their courage, and their relentless belief that things could be different, that dreams could be real. As she drove away from the workshop that evening, her heart ached with love and loss and pride all tangled together. But she also felt a quiet, unshakable certainty. She was not abandoning her dream, she was carrying it forward. She was building new roads from the foundations she had laid, and somewhere ahead, on those uncharted roads, countless new dreams were waiting to be born. Months turned into a year, and Emily Carter's new role at Orion Engineering Solutions unfolded with all the challenges and opportunities she had anticipated. She traveled across the country, meeting with community leaders, visiting struggling schools and setting up educational initiatives in areas long overlooked by mainstream programs. She designed modular workshop kits that could transform any empty space into a fully functioning mechanical lab, complete with tools, manuals, and interactive learning modules. Through her leadership, entire regions began to see a shift. Students who had once believed engineering was out of reach now built engines, designed solar-powered vehicles, and crafted sustainable technologies with their own hands. Emily watched, with a quiet pride, as young men and women, many of them from backgrounds similar to hers, stood straighter, spoke louder, and believed in their own potential for the first time. Still, no matter how far she traveled, no matter how many initiatives she launched, Carter's workshop remained a part of her. She visited as often as her schedule allowed, slipping into the familiar rhythm of the garage, sharing meals with the students, offering advice and lending a hand on the workbenches. Marcus Lee managed the workshop with a firm but compassionate hand, and the advisory board ensured that the original spirit Emily had cultivated remained intact. The workshop grew into a regional landmark, a place where innovation and community merged seamlessly. Companies began to offer internships specifically to Carter's workshop graduates. Universities sent recruiters, and local officials cited the workshop as a model for technical education reform. What had started as a battered dream, reborn in Yaoxinis, an abandoned building, now served as a beacon for what was possible when resilience and vision combined. One warm summer evening, after a long day at a conference in another state, Emily returned to her small hometown for a surprise visit. She pulled up to Carter's workshop just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson. The building glowed with life, students still bustling inside despite the late hour, engines humming, laughter spilling out onto the quiet street. She stood for a moment by her car, watching, her heart full. Inside, she found Sophia, now one of Guy, the senior apprentices, leading a group of younger students through a complex diagnostic exercise. Sophia spotted her and raced over, hugging her tightly before pulling her into the circle of activity. Emily spent the next few hours moving from workstation to workstation, marveling at the skill and creativity on display. Every bolt turned, every schematic drawn, every innovative tweak spoke of growth, of dreams nurtured and strengthened. Later, as the students finished up and began packing their tools, Marcus approached her, holding a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with a simple string. He pressed it into her hands without a word. Curious, Emily sat down on a battered stool and unwrapped the package. Inside was a plaque, handcrafted from brushed steel, engraved with simple words, "In honor of Emily Carter, whose belief in dreams forged a future for us all." Beneath the inscription were the names of every student who had passed through Carter's workshop since its reopening, etched carefully into the metal. Emily traced the letters with her fingers. Overwhelmed by emotion, she could not easily name. Pride, gratitude, humility, love, they all swirled together in a tide she made no attempt to resist. She realized in that moment that her greatest achievement was not the award she had won, nor the career she had built, but the lives she had touched. Every success, every new beginning born from the seeds she had planted, was a victory far greater than any personal accolade. As the stars blinked awake above the town, Emily carried the plaque into the workshop. With Marcus's help, she found the perfect spot on the wall above the main entrance. Together, they mounted it, stepping back to admire the way the soft overhead lights caught the metal surface, making it shimmer. The students gathered around, quiet and respectful, sensing the significance of the moment. Emily turned to them, her voice steady but warm. "This place belongs to all of you," she said. "It was built from dreams, yes, but it is sustained by your hard work, your courage, and your refusal to give up when things get hard. Never let anyone tell you that you do not belong or that your dreams are too big. You belong, your dreams matter, and this world needs you." They nodded, some blinking back tears, others standing a little taller. Later that night, long after everyone had gone home and the town had fallen into a deep, peaceful sleep, Emily remained in the workshop. She walked through the bays, running her hands along the workbenches, the tool racks, the engines under construction. She listened to the silence, filled not with absence but with promise. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the laughter and ridicule she had endured, the nights spent doubting herself, the sabotage, the failures, the victories. Every step, every scar, every triumph had shaped her into the woman standing there now. Emily Carter had not simply built machines, she had built a legacy, one that would endure long after the last engine she repaired had grown silent, one that would carry forward through the hands and hearts of every student who dared to believe they too could turn wrenches into wings and dreams into realities. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Emily finally stepped outside, the cool morning air wrapping around her like a promise. The world was still wide and full of challenges, and she was still just getting started.